Welcome, Duncan Rock. Duncan Rock is back in the house. You were our guest on episode number 29, and I've been dying to have you back. So, how have you been?
I've been really well. Which episode are we up to now? Just so I know.
Oh. I think around 70. I think this week was 78,
Wow. Hey, you're
perhaps.
busy. Wow. Okay. Hey,
I know
congratulations.
that's 50 episodes ago, so that's like almost a year.
Yeah, it must have been about a year ago.
Wow. And we're in the depth of COVID, and you were in a room with a cot because
I
there were
was
painters.
appropriately leaning out against the cot. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's been so long. My daughter no longer sleeps in her cot. She now sleeps in her big girl bed, as she calls it. Um,
Wow.
is an adorable sort of bed with like a tent over it and lights and things. So
That
that's
is so cool.
things have changed. Things have changed.
Yes. And we had a running joke that night that you were going to spit the dummy because there was a cot behind. Do you remember that? And kick the Kimbies, and you hadn't heard that
Yeah,
expression.
you told. I didn't know this. I didn't know this turn of phrase.
Well, I don't know if that phrase actually exists, but it does in my mind. So we'll run with that.
Then it is. Yeah.
Okay, so Duncan, for those people who missed out on episode 29 and don't know who you are, well, first up, everybody go back and listen to episode number 29, where you talked about physical activity. And I know some of our audience may be a little allergic to that word, so let's call it movement. So let's go back and listen to that episode. But Duncan, you are a nutritionist who specializes in promoting good health for performing artists and beyond. You are a registered exercise professional, a member of the Royal Society for Public Health, and you have a career as a professional baritone, and you've toured internationally with numerous opera companies over the years. So that's a lot of different hats. And as I said in episode 29, we talked about all things relating to physical exercise. But this episode, I really am keen to talk to you about nutrition. And I know you hold a master's degree in human nutrition and you're up to date with all the latest clinical information. I can't wait to get started. But before I do, I have to tell you, I looked up many of the myths surrounding nutrition, and there's so many of them. And I'm going to sprinkle some of those myths into some of the questions, and I'll make like a little myth alert announcement as we
Okay.
do.
Okay.
But okay, Duncan, firstly, like what inspired you to transition into this field of diet and nutrition?
Oh, I always had a love affair with health, fitness, and obviously nutrition is a huge part of that. I grew up in Perth in WA, um, and loved playing sport and being active and being on the beach and healthy and all that kind of stuff.
Yes,
Um, and then, of course, as I got older, I'm heading towards 40 now. Um, things
that's
change from
so old.
it's it's well, things transition from being more
Hmm.
about
Hmm.
athletic performance and like aesthetics and things like
Hmm.
that into thinking about things like longevity.
Absolutely.
Particularly now as a father, I'd like to be as healthy as for as long as possible for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
So I guess what was a more passing interest in the field of health and nutrition became a more active, deliberate interest, which
Yes.
made me want to go and study my master's degree. So basically, look, I did my initial studies at the Australian Institute of Fitness, actually, when I was much,
Hmm.
much younger, sort of 18, 19. But when I was in my early 20s, my life took a huge turn. And I won a scholarship to come to London and study music, study a master's degree in music at the school in London called the Guildhall School of Music and
Yes.
Drama.
Yes.
And I
No,
did
well.
that. I completed that, and then sort of had this amazing, I guess, 12 or so year adventure traveling the world as a baritone, as a singer. So started singing a lot in the UK, and then going to France and Italy and Germany, and then started to get a lot of work in the US. Started singing in New York quite a lot, and so that was the sort of path I followed. But a few years ago, when my then girlfriend, now wife, and I were talking about getting married and starting a family, I did recognize a slight incompatibility with what I saw in my sort of immediate future.
Yes.
And what I was currently doing. I was traveling 6, 7, 8 months of the year, which was amazing. And I loved it in my mid-20s,
sure.
30s. But it wasn't compatible with the vision I had of my life as a parent. So I started to look into ways where I could still be active professionally, doing things I enjoy and find interesting and fascinating and fulfilling, but maybe not traveling half the year plus.
Yes.
And so I found, I was looking for other avenues, like maybe I could do something adjacent to my life as a singer. I wasn't so interested in becoming a singing teacher. I absolutely respect singing teachers; they're wonderful. I just didn't see myself doing that.
Sure.
So I wanted to do something that was related, adjacent. And actually, I was working in Brisbane. Actually, I was working for Opera Queensland at the time, and I was listening to what I think was maybe my 10th nutrition podcast that week. I was obsessed with, and then it just sort of dawned on me, maybe this is something I could do formally. I could take interest and turn it into some sort of professional thing. So I found a master's degree that I could do in human nutrition, and began slowly completing this master's degree as I was traveling all over the world. I was doing exams while I was in Boston, and then in New York, and Madrid, and then it was just me and my laptop. I did majority remotely. And so then I finished my master's degree, and I started working, and I was very pleased with myself, and I thought I was being very, very clever.
I bet you were.
And then of course, March 2020 came, and obviously this huge global change because of the pandemic. And then my daughter was born in July 2020. And so things have taken a different turn for me. I'm singing less and less. I am back singing because obviously things are back. I just completed a tour with the Welsh National Opera of the opera Don Giovanni, which is a role I've sung many, many times. But I'm doing more and more work in this health sphere. And actually, since we last spoke, I have completed now the first of 2 years of an MSc in physiotherapy.
Wow.
So it's a 2-year degree. Thank you. Yeah, I've loved it. So I've been working now in a placement position because I've done the academic component. I've been working in a hospital in cardiac rehab, which is a wonderful combination of both my knowledge as a physio student and of course as a nutritionist, because we find ourselves giving a lot of nutritional advice. So there you go. That's an extremely long answer to your question, but that's
okay.
Where I'm at.
Yes, and that all makes perfect sense. And I believe too that your philosophy in terms of good health starts from within, that if we want to take better care of ourselves, we need to start with nutrition. And the other day I was listening to a morning show, and they were talking about cancer, and they were saying now that science is showing that half of cancers are a result of poor lifestyle choices. And the top three, firstly, of course, was cigarette smoking. Yeah. Secondly, was poor eating habits. And thirdly, was consumption of alcohol. So, it makes perfect sense. Like, that is aligning with what you believe. So why is society, even with all this information that's out there, even with all these facts, all these figures, all this proof, why are we as a society getting it so wrong? Why do people still continue to do the wrong thing?
It's a great question. I think it's hard to say, like, are we getting it wrong en masse? I mean, certainly if we look at population statistics, things seem to be getting worse rather than
Mm,
better in terms of
absolutely.
various health outcomes related to lifestyle diseases. I think one of the main reasons is this idea of the obesogenic environment. Although we have a lot of really good information and easier access to good information, more so than ever before, the environment we find ourselves in predisposes us to making bad decisions. There's only so much you can do when you go to the airport and there's literally not a single healthy option to eat, or perhaps there are 19 unhealthy cheap options and one salad that costs $25. Do you know what I mean? There's an
Yes,
environment
absolutely.
we find ourselves in that works entirely against us in many respects. Now, that doesn't mean people can't make good decisions, can't make better decisions, but do you know what I mean? It's there. There's an uphill battle. I would say, for the most part, to live a healthy lifestyle goes against the grain at the moment. Certainly the standard model in the Western world is to live a very unhealthy lifestyle.
Yes.
Go
So,
ahead.
and also too, like we're dealing with propaganda, with TV advertising, with multinationals that are creating foods that are addictive. So, is that part of that environment that you're talking about?
Arguably the biggest part of the environment, I would say. There's just so much money to be made in this
Billions
yeah,
and
and
billions.
yeah, billions, trillions, and trillions. I mean,
Mm.
it you even notice what could be theoretically healthy movements. One thing I'm noticing a lot in my practice is, because I work with a lot of young people through the Voice Care Center, a lot of students or a lot of young West End performers and dancers and things. This move in younger people towards a vegan style of eating, which is great. It's I still have my reservations about it as the optimum diet for human flourishing, but I certainly healthier than a standard Western diet, much
Yes,
healthier.
yes, yes.
And you even see now, only a couple of years in, um, this sort of industrial food world has now usurped what could have been a healthy movement, and now it's all about McPlants and vegan cheese pizzas from Domino's or whatever. Even the health, the what could be moves in a good direction get taken over by fast food companies, by billion-dollar companies, and hijacked, and therefore, so now we're gonna have reams of data about what it's like on the human body to eat an unhealthy vegan diet. And my prediction would be that
Oh
it's
my gosh.
horrendous possibly the worst diet that somebody could because you're likely to be
Mm.
somewhat nutrient deficient and eating all these processed foods. It might be the worst thing people could be doing for their bodies. And a
Yes.
whole generation of current 19, 20-year-olds might be the victims of that.
I've actually heard by a scientist, it was on a podcast, I can't remember which one, that he believed that the vegan diet was the worst one of all. And
Really?
and yes, he gave reasons for that. And even when it came to the whole philosophy around eating vegan, some of those plant foods that people are eating, in terms of where they are in the food chain, they're actually causing more damage by eating those particular foods than eating some of, like eating meat, say, for example. It was really interesting, and I can't quote on it, but all I know is that I did hear somewhere that this gentleman believed that the vegan diet was the worst diet that in for health.
Okay.
It was not a healthy diet. So that's kind of backing up a little bit what you're saying. But when it comes to nutrition, I read somewhere that the word nutrition means connection to earth. And so does that mean that a raw food diet is the best way for us to eat, or is that a myth?
I think what you've articulated touches on an issue that's quite prevalent in the health sphere, but particularly in the nutrition sphere, which I have heard to, and I personally refer to it as the naturalistic fallacy. This idea that if something is natural, it is inherently good. You know, you see a lot of Instagram influencers or whatever who are, you know, they're like primal people, and you know,
Yes.
and it can seem quite sexy. It's
Oh, yes.
quite appealing. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to connect with nature. But of course, it is a fallacy for the most part. You know, one of my professors, you know, used to say, well, you know, botulism is perfectly natural. Arsenic is perfectly natural, and
Oh my God.
these things aren't good for us. You know, just because
No.
something's doesn't mean, you know. We can think of a million examples. Just because something's natural doesn't mean it's good for us. And on the flip side, you know, synthesized antibiotics, there are, you know, unnatural. They're, you know, can be man-made. But of course, if you've got an infection, you want them. You know, so this idea of, like most what I would describe as myths, there's an element of truth to it, right? So in terms of the naturalistic fallacy, yes, generally eating a whole foods diet, you know, eating food as close to its original state as possible, minimizing processed foods. You know, this is a good idea, generally speaking.
Yes.
But, you know, it's certainly not a competition to see who can rip sweet potatoes out of the ground, wipe the dust off, and just bite into them. You know,
I love that.
Yeah, I mean,
I just visualized a caveman standing there ripping potatoes out of the ground.
yeah, or you know, you see people on social media, you know, promoting the eating of raw this, raw that, raw liver, raw test.
Oh, yuck.
You know, this is not necessary. Like,
Okay.
we don't have to go to these ridiculous extremes to get the benefit. And I would say, sort of generally, is all this stuff serves to overcomplicate the process. Like, oh well, if you're not, you know, walking barefoot in the rain and eating raw testicles and, you know, hunting your own, I don't know, squirrels in the park or whatever it is, you're suddenly healthy. This is obvious, yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous, but people still buy it. People sell it and buy it.
Sorry, that's like the funniest thing I've ever heard. I just want to know whose testicles you're eating.
I mean, seriously, there's a guy who pops up on my social media. I think it might be YouTube. He's a doctor and he's an MD, and it's all antagonistic. Like, this is what you eat: oats and banana. You're gonna die poor and lonely. Look at me. I eat raw liver and testicles and papaya or whatever it is. You know, it's sure. I mean, he's probably making a lot of money, but it's not healthy. I would say it's not helpful.
So then what do you think is good nutrition? What constitutes that for you?
I mean, simply put, just giving your body everything it needs to flourish, not just survive, but flourish, and not more. There's a sort of Goldilocks zone of the right amount of nutrition, and we know that under nutrition causes problems. And we know now, actually, in the Western world, well, actually, not just in the Western world, but since about 2014, globally, there are more diseases and death caused by overnutrition now globally than undernutrition. So more disease and death caused from the diseases of what we could call diseases of privilege, people who overconsume nutrition. You know, an achievement of sorts, but an unfortunate one. It's a reality that we have to grapple with.
So is then good nutrition different? Can it mean different things for different people? Are we all different? Like, is it on, like, what I would need be different to what you need? Or do we all need the same thing? Are there
This,
some things that I can eat that you shouldn't eat, and vice versa?
yeah, this is a great question. We were talking about veganism earlier. Obviously there's a debate, an open, I would say still an open question on what the optimal diet for human flourishing is, so optimization is. Should we really be omnivorous? I would say probably, maybe omnivorous, but largely
What does
plant-based.
that mean?
Sorry, omnivorous. You eat meat and vegetables and
Oh, okay. All right.
not carnivorous, not a herbivore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say the best definition I've come across is that humans are opportunistic eaters. So this is why humans can survive in all different climates. If you're an Inuit, you can survive on whale blubber and whatever and seal meat and things like this. Or if you're living close to the equator, you can survive on roots and sweet potatoes and seeds and largely sort of a herbivorous diet.
Mm-hmm.
So humans can survive on a huge range of eating patterns. However, we now know from billions of data points of research that there's a general pattern that seems to work very well for the vast majority of us. So once again, I'm certainly in the mindset at the moment of trying to make things less complicated rather than more
Yes.
complicated. And to be honest, in the absence of pathology, in the absence of the extremes, so when I talk about the extremes, I mean either extreme sickness, extreme pathology on one end, or extreme optimization on the end, Olympic athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Yes.
we need to get a bit fancy, right? If someone's really sick, for example, it seems that for a lot of children with epilepsy, a ketogenic diet seems to be really beneficial. A very, very high fat, low carbohydrate diet. But for most people, I wouldn't recommend that sort of diet. But in that pathology, it's valuable. So in one extreme.
Wow, that's
And then of
interesting.
course, on the other end, Olympic athletes, yeah, you have to get fancy because you're looking at you're looking at making people do things that no human being has ever done before, right? In terms of other things that you should eat that I shouldn't, I mean, obviously, if we have an allergy, if you're allergic to something, maybe it's something you shouldn't eat. But generally, no. We could largely eat about, we should largely all be eating a similar sort of diet. The thing that changes the most is the quantities, So I'm a 6'3", sort of 100 or so kilo, very, very active man. My calorie needs are going to be a lot higher than most people.
Right.
That's the main element that one needs to adjust for. How active are you? How much energy do you need? But I think largely we should be following a similar sort of eating pattern.
I'll come back to this discussion on survival in a moment when we talk about fat storage, because I heard something interesting about that. But on this tangent that we're on at the moment about types of foods, I've heard that there are foods that the eater, when consuming these foods, they release huge amounts of dopamine. Things like refined sugars that give an immediate energy high, release certain chemicals in the brain the same way that cocaine and heroin does. So are these kinds of foods are the ones that are the most addictive, would you say?
Yeah. It's. I mean, I think you make a really good point. To just sort of hold off on it a little bit. I'm always cognizant of not trying to catastrophize. Like eating potato chips and doing cocaine are very, very different
Oh,
experiences.
sure. Sure.
I understand it's a bit cool to sort of say sugar's just the same as cocaine, because yes, if you do a study of brain imaging,
The
it kind of
brain, yes.
like it lights up. But of course, eating a candy bar and doing heroin are
Oh,
not.
yes.
Um,
Yes.
the main thing I find compelling and notice in people in terms of these types of foods is the insulin cortisol relationship. So
Mhm.
just the briefest explanation. Obviously, insulin is the hormone we release to lower our blood sugar. So we eat something, sugary food, high carbohydrate food, our blood sugar goes up. We release insulin to then normalize our blood sugar.
Right.
Cortisol is what we call, simply put, oversimplification, but is the stress hormone.
Yes.
If
Yes.
you're high in stress, you're likely high in cortisol. So there's an inverse relationship between these two hormones. If insulin goes up, cortisol comes down.
Mm.
And what I do notice individuals doing is, so this is why you never hear people say, oh, Marissa, I was so stressed last night. All I could do was eat broccoli and boiled eggs, and Dubai steaks,
And testicles.
Yeah, and balls. Yeah, of course not. People say, Marissa, I was so stressed last night. All I could eat was ice cream, cookies, potato chips,
Mm.
packets of Pringles,
Chocolate.
chocolate.
Yes.
Why? Because these foods are high in processed, refined carbohydrates, and they give us an insulin spike, which gives us the consequent cortisol reduction. Now, pretty nifty trick, right? I mean, this isn't a horrible thing if utilized once in a while as a tool, right? You had a horrible day today. Do you know what? I'm going to have some ice cream and it's going to make me feel a bit better. And there's nothing wrong with this. This is one of the most beautiful things about food. It can make us feel, it can improve our mood, right? Of course, the problem is we do it chronically. We don't just do it once a week, once a fortnight, a couple of times a month, whatever. We do it chronically. We fall into a pattern of stress and then a pattern of chronic poor nutritional habits to try and combat the stress. And that leads to obviously horrendous health consequences. So that more than the addictive nature, I
Right.
do think there is something to this, but I think
Yes.
it's the chronic nature more than the addictive nature. I might be splitting hairs here.
Mm-hmm.
That's more interesting to me, because I think if people recognize that cycle of insulin cortisol relationship, they can sort of be mindful of it and learn to break it. And there are ways people can sort of break that circuit, so to speak, which can be very valuable.
So, in what you just described, okay, it can help. Food can be a mood enhancer by what you're telling me or what you're describing to me. But can food also trigger things like depression? Can it trigger panic attacks? I know for me, if I have more than one coffee a day, my anxiety levels increase. So, are there foods and things like that that can trigger those changes in our mood and our frame of mind?
Yes. Once again, with food, I'm largely interested. There are exceptions, but they're rare. I'm more largely interested in eating patterns over time. This is another reason you mentioned earlier. Why are we getting it wrong? Because food, the outcomes of our behaviors work in a time scale that we're just not very good at operating on. These health outcomes are measured in months, years, and decades. But of
Right.
course, people want results in hours and days. People want
Yes.
to lose weight in 36 hours.
Hmm. Hmm.
If I go keto for 5 days, will I look hot in my bathing suit for my holiday? People we're unfortunately working in time frames that the human brain, particularly at the moment, isn't particularly good at dealing with. We want everything yesterday.
Yes.
So just bearing that in mind, it's not that I think food will acutely trigger anxiety episodes, depressive episodes. You did mention caffeine, and I think that's a really salient point. But of course, caffeine is a drug, not, do you know what I mean? It's not coffee that did that. It's the drug caffeine, which is
Sure.
a little bit,
In the coffee.
I know you ingest it. So,
Hmm.
but it's technically not a food. It doesn't have nutritional
Sure.
value.
Sure.
It's a drug, a chemical. However, in fact, I just gave a lecture on this earlier this week. Certain eating patterns are highly associated with low levels of, for example, depressive symptoms. And certain eating patterns are associated with high levels of depressive symptoms. And, it won't surprise you to hear which ones are associated with high levels of depression and which ones are associated with low level depressions. It's exactly what you think it is. A healthy diet is hugely linked with good mental health, and an unhealthy diet is hugely linked with poor mental health.
Sure.
This one is a struggle at the moment for me. What I find is people who would benefit, and I understand this. This isn't I get it. It's not I'm not coming after people who experience this. I just think it's unfortunate. I think it's a shame.
Sure.
The people who would benefit from this advice are very standoffish, can be very reluctant to accept it. We do recognize that our diet impacts our physical health, and that our physical health impacts our mental health. People do seem to make that connection. However, people then don't make the connection back. That means our diet impacts our mental health.
Right.
People seem...
Right.
I remember when I first started doing research into nutrition for mental health, depression, anxiety, stress, I came across the just absolute barrage of articles written by journalists, clearly with no nutritional training or even understanding, pushing back against it. How dare you say that my mental health problems are because I'm not eating enough eggs, I'm not eating enough carbohydrates. Well, no, that's not what we're saying. We're just saying that we know from billions of data points of evidence that there's a relationship between the two. And your diet, alongside therapeutic or pharmacological care for your mental health, your diet could also be valuable to you. But it seems to be something that people seem very, not just reluctant to accept, but almost adversarial. People don't like to hear this. I'm not entirely sure why, but I, keep working on it.
Yes, and even in terms of behavior too, food can impact behavior. And there was a big study done in a prison in the US. And if you don't know about it, I'll send you the information on it. But also by changing the diet for the prisoners, their behavior started to improve and the crime rate started to come down.
Yeah, I've not. I'd love you to send me that, but I believe it. I believe it. I mean, look. The truth is, we know this to be true. We know that if schools change their dinner menu, the options they have in canteen, you get better outcomes. You get students who can pay better attention. They get better grades. We know this to be true. Like the jury is in. The jury is in for his stuff. It's just we don't do it. We don't do it.
I mean, a child that has a huge amount of sugar is going to make poor choices in behavior compared to a child that has no sugar.
Yeah, I mean, look, we took I see it acutely now. As if I needed any more convincing. My daughter's 2, and we're starting to take her to restaurants. And last week we took her out for afternoon tea. It's obviously in the UK, going for high tea. It's like a nice,
beautiful.
Took this beautiful sort of a brasserie in where we live, called the Ivy, and dressed up and went for afternoon tea. It was lovely. But she normally doesn't eat that much sugar. But she had like some scones, some jam, a little bit of cake. And it was the worst behaved she's ever been in months. Because she got this sugar high and then crashed, and she didn't know what to do. Her brain chemistry was no match for that. Now, obviously, in a 2-year-old, it's more acute than in a 32-year-old. The same chemistry still applies.
Yes. So we've talked about vegan. But there's a whole lot of other diets out there. You know, there's paleo, the Atkins, Mediterranean, there's high protein, low carb. Do any of these actually work, or is there a diet that you know of that has been labeled as a diet that you believe works?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean by works. Which is quite, it works for what? What
Good
are you trying?
nutrition.
Yeah,
What you were talking about in terms of good nutrition and your idea of what that represents.
sure. So, of the commonly followed popular diets, obviously they all have their positives and negatives. They can all be, they can all work or not, depending on what you eat. So, like you say, it a lot, like you mentioned vegan diet. So let's go there. We had quite a lot of convincing evidence in the late 90s, early 2000s that was starting to suggest that maybe a vegan diet might be really, really optimal for human flourishing. A lot of you go back and read studies from 15 years ago. It's really compelling. You're like, wow, these people had great outcomes. We now recognize that a lot of those studies, a lot of that research was subject to healthy user bias. So
Oh, okay.
basically, yeah. So if you were a vegan,
Okay.
yeah, if you were a vegan in 1998, you probably were also running marathons on the weekends and meditating and do you know what I mean? And eating
There was a
non-processed.
holistic approach.
Exactly. You probably, there weren't any vegans in 1998 who also smoked and drank excessively. And do you know what I mean? It was a lifestyle. It was a package deal.
Uh-huh. Yeah, makes sense. Makes
Um,
sense.
and so they were comparing those individuals with just your average person who was overstressed, underexercised, overweight, smoked, drank, whatever, and followed a Western diet. So do you know what I mean? You weren't comparing like for like. There has since been quite a lot of research done on that compared like for like a healthy vegan versus a healthy omnivorous diet. And it seems that if you balance all other factors, which is difficult, but a healthy omnivorous diet might just be a little bit better than a healthy vegan diet, just because of its potential to not be deficient. The vegan diet still has potential to be deficient in certain nutrients, B12 being the obvious one, and then of course the complete profile of amino acids, and of course iron, which iron deficiency, particularly in women, is an issue.
Yes, absolutely.
In many populations. So, but of course you can supplement and overcome that. So yes, you can be extremely healthy. In my opinion, you can be extremely healthy being a vegan. It just takes a bit of considered effort, more so than if you're omnivorous. But of course, if you just say I'm vegan, but you're eating like, Oreos are famously vegan.
I
If you're
love
eating,
Oreos.
yeah, I mean, they're tasty, but are they good for you? No, of course not. If you're eating McPlants and Oreos and all these like meat replacement foods, you're going to be extremely unhealthy. Being vegan isn't the factor. It's the fact you're eating lots of vegetables, whole foods, blah, 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 blah. I do find it amazing, the amount of people who are following this diet at the moment who have decided that it's making them healthy. And you go and maybe have burgers you go to their house for dinner and you have a lovely vegan meal, burgers or something. And like,
Yes.
oh, what are these burgers made out of? They have no idea. Is it made of mushroom? Is it made of soy? Is it made of seitan? Is it made of, what is it made? You have no idea what you're
Yes.
You've
Yes,
just
exactly.
you've bought a commodity that's been sold to you as healthy, but you don't even know what it is. I mean, you have no idea what you're eating. I mean,
No,
there's
so
obviously
true.
yeah.
So true. And it's just everything that you're saying is just common sense. And it's taking a common sense approach and attitude to it all, isn't it?
Yeah, look, if my simplest advice, and when I give general nutrition lectures for companies or whatever, I steal from the American food writer Michael Pollan, who is very interesting because he's quite anti-nutrition. He's quite an anti-nutritionalist in some ways. He likes to simplify it. I think that's what makes him so good. So he wouldn't be good at dealing with pathology, but for the general population, he gives great advice. And he puts it beautifully. He says, eat whole foods, mostly plants, not too much. If you follow that advice, you'll do great. It might not get you your Olympic gold medal. And no, it might not be the diet you need in specific instance of illness pathology. But for the most part, if you're eating whole foods, what we're talking about, minimize the intake of processed foods and eat real foods as much as possible. Fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lower fat meats, things like that. Wonderful. Mostly plants. Now, this is, some people don't like this, but the evidence does indicate that a diet where the bulk of the food volume is largely plant matter seems to be better for optimal human health. Now, when I say plants, I don't just mean like spinach and broccoli. This, of course, just means anything non-animal. So nuts, seeds, grains, legumes, all this stuff, fruits, vegetables. This should form, I would say, in my opinion, 70% of the bulk of your food volume. So if you eat a plate of food, maximum 30% should be animal products. The rest should be grains and vegetables and fruits and seeds and so forth. Still a fair amount of animal product, but you certainly don't want to miss that 70%. That's really important. And then, of course, not too much. Eating the right amount. It seems that, and this is something I've been researching a lot very recently, if you look at the totality of the evidence. Now, this is like people find themselves having quite a strong reaction to this. So I guess prepare yourself. If you look at the totality of the evidence, it seems that eating the correct amount of food, and by that I mean the correct total calories, has about a 50 to 60% effect size on your total nutritional health. So by that, I mean, if you take two identical individuals, they got the identical twins who live the exact same lifestyle. One of them eats all the quote unquote wrong foods, but the right amount, the right total calories. And the other one eats all the quote unquote right foods, but the wrong total calories, overconsumption of calories.
Right.
They're going to be about the same health. So, or the one who eats the right amount of calories, but all junk, will likely be a little bit healthier. So if you're going to focus on one single element, and people don't like to hear this, I understand it can be frustrating to hear. If you are going to focus on one single element, I don't recommend you do this, but if you were to, eating the right amount of food is the number one. It's going to get you the most bang for your buck.
Right.
And I find the opposite. People want to focus on the minutia. Oh, do I need to eliminate gluten? Do I need to start taking this supplement? Do I need to stop drinking dairy? Do I need to go vegan? Do I need to go paleo? Do I need to go keto? This stuff is all relevant and it's all great. But, if you want to focus on a single element that's going to get you the most benefit, eat the correct quantity of food is going to be it.
So that busts a couple of the myths that I had in terms of weight loss. And one of them was cutting carbs is the smartest way to lose weight. And the other one, low calorie and diet food is healthy. But then sweeteners are not necessarily healthy, and sweeteners are a diet food, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, just to go back. So cutting carbs can be effective. If you want to lose weight, if your goal, I want to lose weight in 6 weeks, whatever, cutting carbs can be effective. It kind of puts the body into a bit of a slightly shock state, ketogenic state, and you can lose weight very quickly. Fine. I wouldn't recommend it for a long period of time because I don't think it's optimal for health. Certainly, having a low fiber diet can mess with your digestive system, cardiovascular system. I wouldn't recommend it in long term. But there's nothing magical about cutting carbs. What you're doing when you're cutting carbs is you're cutting calories, and so whatever mechanism you use to cut calories will be effective as long as you're in a calorie deficit. We've known this for 100 years, and people will still
Yes.
come up against it. Fine, they're welcome to be wrong. In terms of, diet foods, if you're eating, one effective tool that can be utilized if one is struggling with weight management is to eat low calorie, high volume foods, because you're still getting that eating experience. You're getting that satiety of having a full stomach, but you're not over consuming calories. So if you eat, for example, a lot of vegetables, how much broccoli could you eat until you're like, oh my God, I got to stop eating. You'd be so full from fiber and volume of food. So that can be an effective tool, a low calorie, high volume diet. Now, I wouldn't recommend you do that with junk food, processed foods, but if you're going to do it with fruits and vegetables and things like that, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of sweeteners, in my opinion, and I think the jury is still out with regards to this. I don't think we're 100% certain. I think some of the anti-sweetener sentiment is a little bit overstated. I don't think you're going to burn a hole in your brain if you drink Diet Coke.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Is it going to give you cancer, aspartame? Maybe. It wouldn't be in my top 20 things to worry about.
Sure.
Look, is Diet Coke good for you? No, of course not. It's not good for you. Is it going to kill you? Probably not. Drink water, drink tea. This is probably a better choice. The thing about something like Diet Coke is, if it stops you drinking regular Coke, then I would say it's probably a good thing. It's a useful tool.
Mm-hmm.
Look, there is some evidence that artificial sweeteners, will still give you an insulin response because it tricks the body into thinking you're having something sweet, and that can kind of mess with your insulin sensitivity. Once again, is it a huge issue? Probably not. Once again, like if you're a professional athlete, you might be thinking about this level of thing. But for the most part, it's not a huge concern. Don't drink Diet Coke. Don't drink 5 cans of Diet Coke a day. If you like Diet Coke on a hot day, I'll drink like some sort of diet soda sometimes. It's refreshing,
Yes,
isn't
same.
it? It's
Yes.
it's one of those ones that's like, don't worry about it. Like, just worry about the more important things.
I just want to quickly touch on one thing because I really want to talk to you about fasting, because
Sure.
this is something that I've been hearing a lot about lately, and researchers and scientists seem to have jumped on the bandwagon with that. But just in terms of carbs, when I was training with a personal trainer many years ago, they told me to stop eating carbs by 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And I actually felt that made a significant change to my body shape when I was combining that with weight training. So I don't know if it was a combination of the two or just the weight training that was doing that. However, what about when it comes to eating late at night? Because food turns into energy and we store that energy, it turns into fat. Should we, because as teachers and as performers, we often eat late at night. Is that a bad thing?
Yeah, look, it's not an inherently bad thing. I think the main issue as a performer, particularly like a vocal performer, you'd be concerned of is the potential for exacerbation of reflux symptoms.
Oh,
It doesn't
yes.
happen to everyone.
Yes.
It doesn't even happen to everyone who has reflux, but it might be a consideration.
Yes.
Look, in terms of the advice, I know it's very common advice, no carbs after 2 p.m., whatever. Look, it's great that it had an impact on you, but the reason it had an impact on you is because it was a mechanism for reducing your overall calorie intake. There's nothing magical about the time of eating carbs. Now, once again, if you're a professional athlete, or let's say just a high intensity athletic person, like a weekend warrior, I put myself in this category. Look, there is some evidence that if you eat the majority of your carbohydrates in and around your workouts, there may be some benefit. It might be a little bit better benefit for more beneficial for, fueling the workouts. You might be slightly less likely to store body fat because you're using the carbs directly after you consume them. But once again, this is the minutia. This is the absolute minutia. The important thing is eating the correct total amount of carbohydrates throughout the day.
Yes.
If you eat them at breakfast, lunch, or dinner, for the most part, doesn't really matter. Yes, I understand people could send me studies that show there's a bit of benefit. I recognize that, but in totality, it's not that important. There's some benefit eating carbohydrates late at night. It helps with serotonin production.
Oh, really? So it doesn't disrupt sleep. It's the opposite.
I would say it's probably more likely the opposite. More likely the opposite.
Really?
Because think about that insulin cortisol response I was telling you about. If you get an slight insulin rise because you ate carbohydrates, you get a decrease in cortisol, which helps. You need a decrease in cortisol to fall asleep, right? So, if not eating carbs after 3 works for you, wonderful. But
I don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
No. But that what you just said makes sense, because if you have a huge meal at lunch, what you want to do is go and have an afternoon nap. And that's what they do in Europe. They have their main meal at lunchtime, have a nap, and then have a small...
It's a beautiful way of living. We should all do it. I just spent the weekend at a wedding in the south of France. A very good friend of mine.
Oh, I love the south of France.
It was glorious. A glorious wedding. And it was big lunch, little nap.
Amazing. Now I want to get on to fasting, because I know we have a time restraint here. Sure. But there seems to be a lot of evidence that fasting is really beneficial from a mental and physiological standpoint. And it's one of the best things that we can do for ourselves. There's a lot of people endorsing fasting at the moment. And that could even be as simple as ensuring that there is at least a 12-hour window from the time we eat dinner at night to when we have breakfast in the morning.
Sure.
Some people talk about it in terms of having 1 day of fasting a week. Some say maybe 1 day a month. And what's your point of view on fasting? And is it true that there are benefits relating to it?
Yeah. So for full disclosure, I'm not doing it at the moment because the training I'm doing it is a little bit too intense. But I've utilized fasting a lot myself. So
yes.
Just the potential for bias to creep in. Like with most things, it's become popular. So people exaggerate the claims before they, people make claims that they know they can't make because it helps them sell a book about fasting or their podcast about fasting or whatever. The first thing I would say is to caution people about the extraordinary nature of some of these claims that are made. By this, I'm talking about things like cellular autophagy, anti-aging. It's possible that fasting might be a little bit beneficial for these things, but I think, once again, the jury is still out. We can't say for sure.
Right.
What I do notice fasting can be really beneficial for individuals, and I do think the research, we can say, basically backs this up, is that it helps people improve their metabolic flexibility. And by that, I mean, it means people stop being tied to needing to eat at a certain time. People start to recognize, oh, if I don't eat breakfast, maybe I won't drop dead in the street. How about that? The thing is, one of the problems we're having now of the obesity epidemic, and it truly is an epidemic, comes out of something wonderful about human physiology. And it's the reason we've managed to survive so long, is where we have this extraordinary ability to store energy on our bodies
Yes.
for periods of famine.
Yes.
It's extraordinary capacity we have.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the situation we have is we're storing all this energy and we have no famine because we're constantly just eating, at least 3 times a day, normally more.
Yes.
So we have all the feasting and none of the famine that is supposed to accompany the feasting. If, in my experience, when most people try some sort of fasting, and I would recommend people go into it slowly. So if you don't start with 16 hours, start with 10 hours, then do 11, 12, 13, build it up slowly over the course of weeks. What people realize very quickly, surprisingly quickly, is that feeling that we call hunger is actually just the transient effects of hunger hormones circulating in the bloodstream for about 15 minutes. And that goes away. Yeah.
Does
so,
it?
yeah, you feel hungry and you go, oh my gosh, if I don't eat, I'm going to pass out.
I get hangry.
Yep. Most people find they stop getting it.
Okay.
The effect of ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, once again, simply put, it's the same as adrenaline. Like when you have adrenaline surging through your body, you feel all hyped up for 15, 20 minutes, and then it passes. It's the same with ghrelin. And what people do, I think I would recommend everyone try fasting at least a little bit, just to develop that mindfulness and awareness of their physiology. Realize you don't have to be a slave to your hunger. It's just a feeling. It's just a feeling like anything else in the body.
See, it scares me. I feel like my blood sugars are dropping. I feel like my blood pressure's dropping, but that's all in my mind.
Well, no, I mean, your blood sugar is dropping, but you'll use this metabolic flexibility, this ability for your body to go, okay, well, I've got no food. I will mobilize some fat cells into energy, and then I'll have energy. This is a wonderful thing. I'm still of the mindset, and I realize this isn't popular because, look, disordered eating is a problem.
Yes.
And a very serious thing. And if individuals experiencing disordered eating, it should be taken very seriously. But compared to the obesity epidemic, it's a grenade compared to an atom bomb, right? In terms of magnitude effect. I'm not saying on the individual. I'm not saying, just to clarify, I'm not saying on the effect on the individual. Disordered eating can be debilitating, even deadly. It's a terrible, important disease. But on population, the obesity epidemic is going to, I mean, in the UK where I work, where we have the NHS, the obesity epidemic is going to destroy our healthcare system within the next 20 years if we don't get it under control. We're way too full.
Wow.
The same can't be said about the effect of disordered eating. It's
sure, exactly.
important to the individual, but it's not a huge population health issue. I only say that because what I'm going to say is I still think it's better to skip an unhealthy meal than to consume an unhealthy meal. So like if you're at a train station, airport, and the only option is McDonald's, just skip it. Just don't eat it. Save your money, save your digestive system. If you are someone who has done things like recognize the value, the possibility of fasting, you won't be scared. Because essentially what people are saying is, oh, I better eat this crappy, unhealthy processed food because it's
better than nothing.
Yeah, it's better than nothing.
People say. Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. It's not better than nothing. It's worse than nothing. It's
not when you put it that way.
Yeah. And if you are someone who's gone, look, I'm not saying this is necessary, but just as an experiment, I've built it up over time, just as a preamble. But, I was doing 12-hour fasts and, 14, 16. And I thought, let me just see what happens. I would try to extend it to 20 hours. I was doing one meal a day for a little bit. And you just do it. You get the energy from elsewhere. I was eating big meals at night, and throughout the day, You
You were
draw
fine.
on the reserves of the body, which is what we're supposed to be able to do, but we almost lose the ability to.
But does that not mess up your metabolism or your digestive system and your pooping?
uh, Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. I know it's very trendy to talk about metabolism, or these things will speed up your
Mm,
metabolism. These,
yes.
I wouldn't worry about the metabolism. I
Mm,
just, eat healthy food, do some exercise.
yeah.
What
So,
do you know what your metabolic rate is?
no,
Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like everyone's worried about speeding up their metabolism and slowing it
I
down, but they
don't.
don't know what it
Yeah.
is. Like it's
Yeah.
it's a, it's an erroneous concern
Mm,
for the majority of people.
mm.
I wouldn't.
I don't have a weight problem.
Sure.
So I'm one of the lucky ones, and my husband says, "Oh, you can skip a meal and lose a kilo, like it just drops off you." Whereas most people have to go without food. I'm just one of those people, I suppose. But I know what works for me, so I kind of stick to what works for me. But
Right.
when it comes, so this is another myth busting thing where people say breakfast is the most important meal of the day and that we should eat every couple of hours rather than having 3 meals a day. And I know a lot of personal trainers talk about that with their clients. Oh, you should eat every couple of hours to keep your metabolism going.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, if somebody's goal is maximum protein synthesis, so either someone who is a bodybuilder or a strength
Okay.
athlete on that athletic end of the spectrum, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, someone who's very frail, like an elderly person with high levels of sarcopenia. There is some evidence that eating protein more regularly is beneficial for that every 3 hours or so. So if you, let's say you need 150 grams of protein in the day, optimized, there is some evidence that in the extremes, 5 servings of 30 grams is a little bit better than 3 servings of 50 grams. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
once again, only in these extremes.
Hmm.
It,
Hmm.
it, now, look, to take it to the maximum distillation, should you eat your 150 grams of protein in one serving? Yeah, probably not. It's probably not optimal. It's probably going to be a bit hard to digest, blah, 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 blah. But whether it's 2 servings, 4 servings, 6 servings for the average person, it really doesn't matter. And the reason I would say probably that advice, I do recognize a lot of personal trainers give, I would say overall it's probably bad advice. It's just because the more eating opportunities you introduce into the day, the more people are likely to overconsume calories. Um,
Yes, and they'll get used to eating that, wouldn't they? So
yeah,
and then if they don't have that protein available, then they'll eat the McDonald's at the airport instead.
exactly. That's where that mentality really sets in. They're like, oh, I'm here at the train station. Oh, I haven't eaten in 2 hours. I better eat a Big Mac because it's got 30 grams of protein, whatever.
Mm,
Otherwise, my muscles are going to shrink. No. It's well-intentioned advice, and it's not okay. It's probably wrong to say it's bad advice, but I think generally it's unhelpful. It's
mhm.
unhelpful. If three meals a day works for you, that's beautiful. Like you'll be fine. If 2 meals a day works for you, I think that's fine. I would probably say 1 meal a day is probably suboptimal for most people. You're probably not going to get your necessary intake of micronutrients in one meal. I'm yet to see people able to do that unless you have a tremendous appetite in the evening, for example. But
Mhm.
this thing of breakfast is the most important meal of the day. What does that even mean?
It's
It's
a myth.
yeah.
We just busted another myth. We're doing really well. Now, I'm mindful of the time here because I know you have to go. Yeah? Yeah. So can we just have another 5 minutes to do a wrap up?
Let's do a wrap up and then look if we can always talk again in
I
a few
would
weeks.
love to because I have like literally so many things that I haven't even touched upon about, recommended body fat mass for men and women. How do we burn fat without burning muscle?
Sure.
All this. How do we build muscle? There's so many questions. So, okay, we're going to start wrapping up because I know that you have another appointment, and we're so lucky to have had you back. And I would love for you to come back again because all my questions that I have here that I'm just dying to have answers from you. So, if you had to recommend 5 foods that people should eat and were important to their diet, what would you recommend?
Oh gosh. I would eat daily some sort of green vegetable. If you hate broccoli, don't worry about it. Eat kale, eat spinach, eat
Mm,
peas. Try to eat some sort of green vegetable daily.
mhm.
Eat at least one piece of fruit daily. Find the couple of complex carbohydrates that work for you, both practically and in taste and in terms of like your preparation, and stick with them. Stick with them above and beyond. You know, when you feel like processed, refined foods, try to go for those. They might have the same sort of neurochemical effect that you're searching for without the detriment. And then protein sources. Come to terms, have an idea of how much protein you need a day to optimize your health and figure out how you get there each day. Like if you need 100 grams of protein, well, how many grams of protein is in one egg, for example? A lot of people don't know, it depends on the size of the egg, 6 grams, 7 grams, 8 grams. Have an idea of this protein intake, and then find out the types of proteins you like to eat. Have an idea of how much you need to consume each day to get to that
Sure,
limit.
sure.
So fruits, I
Okay.
mean, how boring an answer. Eat fruits, vegetables, complex carbs, and healthy proteins. How about that?
That's really interesting. I heard another guy who was saying he was endorsing, this is when we come back to all these opinions and all these conflicting reports. He was saying dark chocolate, so cacao,
Yeah.
um, olive oil, and berries were 3 that he included in his top 5. It was very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, those things are good. Of those three, I'd say olive oil is,
Mhm.
if you want to think of a single. But
Mm.
once again, I'm not so focused on single elements. It's patterns.
Sure,
You know,
sure, sure.
if you
And
eat
what
if you eat
about,
junk and then throw in a few berries, it's not going to do anything. You know,
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Common sense approach. What about the worst thing that you could possibly eat?
I mean, obviously trans fats. Um,
Like,
we, yeah, really like well that they used to put a lot in processed foods. They're becoming illegal actually here in Europe. I'm not sure what the situation
oh, okay.
really is. Yeah, like hydrogenated seed oils. Um,
Oh, yes.
that are used to like
Yes.
increase. If you look at a food in a plastic bag, and the expiry date is like 3 years from now, put it away. That's
Ah, interesting,
yeah, that's
interesting.
not a good thing to be eating generally. Generally,
Right,
there's always exceptions, but
right.
um,
Yes.
yeah, I would stay away from those. Anything else can be used in moderation.
Hmm.
Yeah, alcohol too. Moderation. Probably not smoking. I know it's not food. You
No,
probably
but it's a
probably
bad
know
habit.
there's probably no amount of smoking that's okay. Every
Yes,
cigarette is doing some sort of damage.
yes,
You know.
yes, exactly. All right. We're going to have to leave it there. I know that you're up to lots of things that are coming up for you in the future. Is there anything in particular that you want to share with us?
No, no, I'm just
No?
sort of plugging away. Yeah, I'm in a weird transitory place in my life. I have some concerts coming up. I'm with the English National Opera later this year. I'm
Wonderful.
in the Opera House in Toulouse next year. But it's all
Wow.
but no, I'm mainly just I'm sort of in a bit of a hibernation state. I'm working very hard, but with my
Yes.
minders, I'm just focusing on my obviously my placement is taking the majority of my time.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I went from a period of very much pushing everything out for a while, you know, before, like literally singing out,
Yes.
and now
Yes.
I'm in more of a state of like
So you're
learning.
in the state
learning.
of receiving, whereas
Yeah,
before you were giving, and there, yes, so you're in a different season at the moment.
exactly, which is
Yeah,
great, you know, and
that's
also
balance.
yeah, and most importantly, obviously, learning how to be a dad is, you know, is
That's a
my
big
focus
job.
of my life at the
Yes.
moment. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So no, I'm not, you know, obviously we were talking earlier about Instagram and things. I'm, although I'm very busy, I'm not so much putting myself out there at the moment. I'm very much in a bit of a cocoon, educational cocoon at the moment. But
Hmm.
it's been lovely after sort of 15 years of, you know, it's quite a nice position to be in. Actually, it's quite a
Yes.
privilege. Actually, to I was talking to someone about, gosh, the ability to at my at my age to be able to take time out and just learn, pursue something new. It's a real privilege, a privileged position to
Yes.
be in. I'm very
Yes.
grateful.
I
Actually.
totally get that. Totally
Mm.
get it. Now, we're going to share all your links with our listeners in the show notes. So if anyone wants to ask you anything specific, they can reach out to you, and you can charge them a lot of money if you wish. That's your business.
No, my problem is I'm such a nerd for this stuff. If anyone asks me a question, I'm like so eager to share. But I, of
I know
course,
you are. You're so
I
kind.
but I am, you know, obviously if people want like in-depth, personalized stuff, I am available for consultations. I work
Mm.
majority online. I do work at a clinic in London, but I work majority online with a lot of people overseas. A lot of my clients at the moment are in the States, because I work with the San Francisco Opera with their young artists. So look, if anyone is interested in talking about things specifically for themselves, please get in touch. I'm always available to help people.
Well, I do hope that you'll come back really soon and we can talk about some of those other topics that we thought that we would get around to that we haven't. It would be
I mean,
such
there's
a
always the next
joy.
thing. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to talk to you, and I'd love to come. We've obviously got a list of all the questions, so
Yes, totally geeking out on it because I do have a little bit of an interest and a fascination in all of this as well, and listen to a lot of thought leaders and a lot of people that are researching and looking into the science of all of this. And plus, we're bombarded in the media about what's healthy, what's not, and it changes by the day. There's always a new study. Researchers from wherever have discovered that
but
whatever.
that's, you know, just since you brought it up, I do need to run, but you know, the media reporting of nutritional science is absolute garbage. I mean,
Oh, I agree.
absolute garbage. Yeah, journalists are amazing people. I mean, if you're
Mm,
investigative journalist, or you know, I don't have a problem with journalists. They're often extraordinarily fascinating, intelligent people, but the media reporting of nutrition is horrendous. Don't read it. If it's a journalist writing about nutrition, don't read it. They don't know what they're talking
okay.
about. 999 times out of 1,000, it's they've read the headline of a study and then gone and written an article.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be allowed. Media reporting of
Yes.
nutrition science should not be allowed.
Yes.
It's
And
so bad.
it's too much. It's every day. It's
It's
every day.
it's sensationalist headlines for people who don't understand it,
Yeah,
with respect, to be
absolutely.
honest, you know,
Yes.
sorry.
Well, look, thank you so much, Duncan. It's been such a privilege. Totally geeking out on all of this is so much fun, especially with you. You make it very interesting and you break it down so we can all understand it, which is really important. Wish you all the best, and we're going to have you back as soon as you're available to come back and finish this all off with us.
It'd be my pleasure. It'd be my pleasure.
Okay. Well, good luck and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much for being very generous with your time and your knowledge.
And my pleasure.
Thank you.
Speak to you next time.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.